All right. Where are we going? Where are we going? What we doing? What we doing? Let's see. Oh, guys. Hey, you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old podcast, my friends, I've got for you two stories about plots and about husbands. You know, it's a pretty common one, righty? The husband did it. They did it. They do be doing it. They always do be doing it. But for these stories I have for you, they're probably a little wilder than you may be expecting. A little more crazy than the usual husband kills wife or whatever. The first story takes us to Carlton, Texas. The second to New Jersey to talk about a radio jockey who was having some troubles off mic. I guess you could say they soon became on mic in a series of strange and ludicrous events. Like me starting a podcast. That's a ludicrous event. I mean, leaving all your eggs in a YouTube basket is kind of a bad idea. And you know what else is a bad idea? Leaving all your eggs in a meth gang's basket. That too, surprisingly, it's a bad idea. Nancy and Frank, they'd been married for almost 30 years by the time 2012 rolled around. Well, Frank soon got the old wink wink from another woman. Then he misappropriated some funds, quite a bit, but just resting in his account, of course. And then he hired a bunch of, just plain idiots for the job. He hired the Trailer Park Boys to try and do a little job for him. It went about as well as you can imagine. Now, this is a very twisting tale. It's like something directly out of a Coen Brothers movie. Think Fargo times 10. So let's give it a go. Now let's start with the Howards. Frank Howard, he was the son of a preacher man who grew up in South Central Texas. He'd been married for a short time in college, but when that didn't work out, he married Nancy Shore, whom he met in a church. They married in 1983, and in 1985, their first daughter arrived. The young family would move to Carrollton, where they would have 2 more children. This was, a close-knit, happy old family, very religious, always singing in the Baptist choir, all the community stuff people always go on about. And so life kind of just occurred. The children grew. Frank, he made the family bread as an accountant. He was partner of a small firm, and he had over 500 clients. As the late 2000s arrived, the children, they were all grown up more or less. The 2 eldest were married, the youngest was in college. However, as soon as it looked like Frank and Nancy might, have finally some more time for each other, Frank, he took on a new client. Now this new client was a wealthy businessman who absolutely raked in the money on Department of Defense contracts, supplying ice, I suppose they needed to. It's very hot over there. 2 military bases in Iraq. I mean, it really does strike me as a very strange thing to make your fortune on. I mean, I suppose someone has to do it. Just kind of odd, but okay. So this client needed Frank a lot. And so Frank and Nancy, even though, their children were all grown, they began to have, less time for each other, unfortunately. Frank, he was set up with a new office space. He was flying in on private jets. Like, this new client was taking very good care of his accountant. In fact, Frank would eventually become CFO, Chief Financial Officer, of this war ice business. Frank, he would travel around the world all the time, sending ice to military bases. Nancy, she was sitting at home. And it was while Frank was in California in 2009 that he met Suzanne Leontief, a dental hygienist. Why is it always dental hygienists? I swear to God. And over the following few days, they really just absolutely hit it off. She herself was in the process of getting a divorce, while Frank told her, "Whoa, what are the odds?" Subtly takes wedding ring off. "Me too." This affair would continue over the months and the years that followed. Frank, he would take her on trips, to the Super Bowl. He would pay almost $1 million for a house for her in Santa Cruz. He would send her money, lots of money. Over $700,000. He would fly on the private jet to see her and pay for her flights and accommodation when she would come to Dallas. They were in love. And Frank, he would come clean and he'd say, well, here, listen, I'm not actually divorced, but, I'm separated. I'm all yours. And so, Frank and Suzanne, they would fight. Why hadn't he gotten a divorce when she was making him miserable? Which was what Frank was saying to Suzanne. Oh, yeah, of course. I'm so unhappy in my marriage. That's like get out of jail free card of why it's okay to cheat, really. That's all you need to know. And he would say, I haven't divorced Nancy because it's just a bad time. It's always a bad time. Kids' graduation. The kids are getting married. Oh, I can't divorce when my kids are getting married. That would ruin it. Nancy is sick. I can't divorce her now. She's unwell. There's always some fucking bullshit reason because he just wanted his cake. He wanted his cake and he wanted to eat it too, which again is such a weird saying to me. I mean, if you have a slice of cake, you're going to want to eat it. I would like my cake and to eat it too. What's the point in having a cake otherwise? All right. And of course, you guessed, his desire, wink, wink, kind of semi-desire to divorce Nancy, that would be a huge surprise to Nancy. Absolutely, she had no idea of her husband had essentially this new partner that he was spending millions on for her house in Santa Cruz and giving her money and going to the Super Bowl and all this kind of shit. Nancy had no idea. She just thought her husband was busy with work all the time. So that was a surprise to her. What would be an even bigger surprise to Nancy was what happened on August 18th, 2012. After leaving the First Baptist Church in Carrollton at about 7:30 p.m., on a dirty old day, it was raining, Nancy stopped by to get some food. She knew about as much about what Frank was up to as she did about the car that was following her, meaning sweet fuck all. As she pulled into her driveway, the car was close behind her. She got out carrying her purse and the food, and as she did, someone grabbed her by the neck and pointed a gun at her head, demanding her purse. She had never seen this guy before, seemed to be in his 20s, and after she gave him what he wanted, he shot her in the head. This guy ran, and Nancy was left bleeding out on the garage floor. Now, Carlton, just on the outskirts of Dallas, it's a nice place. It has a population of about 130,000 people. A safe place, not much violent crime. But just to the east of Carrollton, not quite the same. Poverty, drugs, meth. And that's where we're now going. That's where we're gonna meet some people. Quite a few people, actually. Each one kind of dumber than the last. Billy Earl Johnson had been in and out of prison quite a bit. He was in his late 40s and he loved bikes almost as much as he loved meth. He got out of prison in February 2009 and he went home to Ben Wheeler, East Texas. In the summer of that year, he had a new girlfriend, Stacy Serenko, and he was just lazing about, fresh out of jail. He got a call. A man on the line introduced himself as John and said he'd heard of Billy Earl Johnson and thought he might be able to help him out. Help him out by killing John's wife. Billy said, well, hey, I'm just out of prison. I could use some money. Why not? So Billy went and met this John, where John gave Billy a brown envelope with $60,000 in it, along with a photo of Nancy. Make it look like an accident, this John said. Billy said, yeah, sure, boss, of course. And then he did a swift turnaround. He went back to Ben Wheeler, 60 grand the richer, and he started living the high life. He was generous. He paid for drinks at the bars. He paid for dinners. He paid for drugs. He would say the days after he got this 60 grand from this John were a blur of shopping and meth-fueled banging. Sweet. This led to Billy getting arrested. And the rest of the money, there wasn't much left of that 60 grand John had given him, but whatever was left was confiscated. When Billy got out of jail a couple of days later, he called this John guy again, saying he needed more money. And so Billy and his girlfriend Stacy, they once again met with John, where Stacy secretly photographed John. And John gave Billy another 35 grand. Stacy photographing this John for, as you can guess, blackmail reasons. So John, now having given Billy 95 grand and his wife still alive, I don't know what he was thinking was going to happen. And of course, Billy, what do you think he did with the 35 grand he had? Now, he did exactly what he did with the 35 grand he had done with the 60 grand, which was piss it away. I don't know what John was expecting would happen when he gave meth heads quite a bit of money, and without any kind of, I'll give you half now, I'll give you half later. There was none of that. He was just paying up front. He deserves this to happen to his money, to be quite honest. And Billy had so much money, he would, to quote him, wipe his ass with it. He'd buy a Chevy Firebird. He'd buy motorcycles, motel rooms for them to party in, boats, you name it, which is quite a lot. He's making this 35 grand to go pretty far, to be fair. Billy would hire a bodyguard named Charlie Louderman, who later Billy would wish had been a quieter man. Billy would continue to ask John for more money every few months. The money always mysteriously disappearing, on meth. He would spend it as soon as he would get it. Of course he would. He was burning a hole. Billy had no intention of actually killing anybody. He was just going to take this John, which is a very fitting fucking name, for as much money as he possibly could. Now, Billy and Charlie would eventually be kind of forced to get on a conference call with John. And John would tell them to make it look like a burglary, and there would be 40 grand worth of jewelry in the house to take. They could set fire to the place after to cover their tracks. Or they could just open fire on her while she was in a crowded restaurant. Like it's that scene in The God. Yeah, open fire on her while she's in the middle of a crowded restaurant. That will look like an accident. So they would kind of formulate these plans. They would get everything together. And finally, maybe when it looked like they were about to actually do what John was paying them to do, John boys. Oh, man. Bubby. Things would just suddenly go wrong. Being high all the time will do that. They'll do that to you. And as you can imagine, this John was getting pissed off that his wife was still alive. And this went on for quite some time, with John eventually forking over $1 million in cash and another $1 million in bail bonds for these absolute methed up rejects, right, living in Ben Wheeler, bumfuck Texas. At one point when Billy and Stacy were arrested, they had enough meth on them to be charged with felony trafficking. And when in jail, Stacy told an FBI agent about the plot to murder Nancy, the one they hadn't carried out yet. The FBI agent did not believe her, and John posted bond once again, as he always did. Now in 2011, right, word began to spread about Billy's gold mine he had going on. This guy, this whale he was taking for a ride. And so Billy's nephew, a guy named Michael Speck, he moved to get in on that action, as he would. While John was getting more and more frustrated, remember this is 2011, it started in 2009, so going on for 2 years at this point, him paying them a lot of money and them smoking it or shooting it up or whatever. Billy, he basically had an entire entourage, sucking on the teat of murder plot money. John, he was their ATM. Whenever they needed a few bucks, they'd go on another, they needed money to go on another binge. Ring, ring. How are you, John? Yeah, we'll do the whole murder thing later, but now, money time. Cough it up, choppers. In May 2012, after another meeting with John, Billy and Stacy, this time accompanied by Stacy's son Dustin and Billy's nephew Michael, John once again told them a plan where they would get the $100,000 life insurance policy and $5,000 a week for the rest of their lives if they just friggin' went ahead and killed her. However, unsurprisingly, Billy and Stacy were arrested not long after once again. But this time, John, after 3 years, apparently, was how long it took him to have had enough. It took him 3 years. Can you believe that? Oh my God.
Hey. Hello? Hey. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. What's happening?
Hey, I can get out of here. It's going to take about a month to get out of here, but I need some money.
Well, that's part of my problem. I'm still cut off from everything I've got going on. So, because, I mean, what happened to Michael? I gave him a bunch of money.
Well, how much you give him?
And I don't even know anymore. It's been so long.
Did you give him 20?
At least.
See, I just wrote Stacy a letter and told her that he in other words, he probably me.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is that, so I mean, it's that keeps happening. So I got nothing left. That's the problem. I gave him that to come get you out, and then I hadn't seen or heard from him.
So where'd that money go?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Where did all that money go? Because he's got it all. And he said he'd go take care of everything. And I have heard absolutely nothing from him since. So that's my problem. I got nothing left.
Yeah, nothing.
No, I gave him everything.
There ain't nothing you can do.
I gave him everything.
And so, Stacy's son, Dustin, and Billy's nephew, Michael, they took over. They began contacting John for money, and they were going to do it. They were going to kill Nancy, if you just, maybe just paid us first. Much like Billy and Stacy, they smoked it up. In the summer of 2012, Stacy's son, Dustin, and a friend of his named Jason, by the way, who did not know about the plot, they were in Carrollton to go collect money from John. Money that John left behind a house he owned. They were, let's say, a little buzzed, and they got lost in Nancy's neighborhood. They were eventually pulled over by the cops, at which point Dustin let slip that he was a hitman who'd been hired to kill John's wife.
So how long have you been in Carrollton tonight?
I've been trying to find my uncle's house for 2, 3, 4 hours.
Okay. The reason I asked because I saw you guys earlier, and I see you again, and it's
we were going in circles and circles and circles.
Tell me who you were visiting here, because now I'm confused. You said uncle, and then you just said it.
His name's John. Okay.
Okay.
We always called him John.
Okay.
That was it.
So John's a friend of the family.
Yes, basically.
They were taken in, report filed, but the police just thought they were crazy meth heads, and they were released that same day. So that's twice. The police, heard about the murder plot and were just like, these are just crazy methed up losers. Don't listen to a word they're saying. Nice. And now Jason knew about the murder plot. The cast of characters in the story, it's intense. Jason had written down John's phone number, and Jason and his wife Stephanie, they began to now extort John. Give us the money or we'll go to the police. And they got $35,000 out of him. So John got extorted by Billy. He then got extorted by Billy and Stacy. John then got extorted by Stacy's son Dustin and Billy's nephew Michael. John then got extorted by Jason, Dustin's friend, and his girlfriend Stephanie. That's 6 people who... sorry, and then there was the bodyguard, Charlie Louderman. So that's 7 people who would call John on a regular, demanding money. It's honestly very funny and a little bit impressive. So then, John, now being extorted by another 2 people, he then began calling them back, me like, here, listen, fuck it, would you guys, will somebody please, would you guys kill my wife? I don't mind if you're extorting me, just somebody do it. At this time, John was still in contact with Michael Speck, Billy's nephew. Michael Speck, he eventually contacted an old cellmate of his named Mr. L. And Nancy would eventually end up shot by someone. Convoluted as all hell. The funny thing in all this, after the money that went around, the over $1 million, well, $2 million if you count the bail bonds, and all the characters that were involved, the person who actually pulled the trigger only got $1,000 for it. By the way, when I say who pulled the trigger, I'll come back to that in a bit. So as I said, John spent over $2 million on the plot. It took years to come to fruition, and most of it went nowhere. And funny thing is, actually, it all went nowhere. See, Nancy, she was shot in the head. She was shot in the face, but she didn't die. She eventually, after being shot, she regained consciousness. She called 911, and she even managed to open the door to the police when they arrived.
Carrollton 911, what's the address of the emergency?
I've been shot, please.
What's the address, ma'am?
Help me, please.
Yes, ma'am, they're already on the way. What's your name?
Debbie Howard.
Okay.
She was rushed to hospital, and she'd been shot in the noggin, but she would make a full recovery eventually, but she would lose her left eye. And so the investigation began. At first it was aggravated burglary, but soon this web of shite began to be revealed. Now Frank, he was in Lake Tahoe when it happened, and he rushed back to Carlton to be with his beloved wife. Frank was then interviewed by the police.
Can you update me on her condition, what the doctors have said?
Yes. Actually, it sounds bad when you say somebody shot me, but actually very, very good. No brain damage, none of that. So she'll lose her left eye, but from there it will be cosmetic stuff.
What I know about her, it doesn't seem like she would have many problems with anybody. Has she?
Oh no, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Would you have a problem if we ran an analysis on your cell phone? No?
If there's, you put up a reward or do anything like that, I'll do it.
Okay.
Again, whatever. But anyway,
once we get to the point where we've exhausted all of our investigative leads, that's another step we would take.
I'm just saying, just whatever we need to do.
Because obviously money can prompt people to give information.
When Nancy was able to, 3 days after being shot, she gave the police a full description of the perpetrator. The police would find surveillance footage showing Nancy arriving at the church the evening she was shot, and of her being followed by another car. They also soon learned from Frank's phone that he'd been having an affair, which was swiftly followed by Nancy and the family learning about it. The Carrollton detectives eventually learned of the police report, the one filed when Dustin was lost in Nancy's neighborhood and told the police he was a hitman. He was interrogated. They swiftly went back to him and said, oh, hey, and he told them everything. They then spoke with Billy Earl Johnson, who was still in jail, who told them even more.
I got a reputation of being a badass. I ain't, everybody's claiming me to be tough and bad. I don't claim to be tough and bad. I'm mean. I'm gonna hurt you. If you jump on me, I'm gonna hurt you. 49 years old. I done been through the pen total 15 years. I got grandkids that I want to spend the rest of my life with. I want to be free, and I want out this weekend. I got the big ace in the hole, and I got the ball in my court on this.
He told the police that he wanted out if he gave them what they wanted. That he was, listen, I was taking this guy for a ride. I was never going to kill Nancy. I was just, just taking money. I was just getting money. I was never actually going to kill anybody, so you can't kind of charge me with that.
I want my back scratched too. I'm not going to go kill nobody.
They then spoke with Charlie Louderman also, and they got the photo Stacey had taken from her and Billy's second meeting with John. John, aka Frank Howard, he was arrested. The car that followed Nancy out of the church parking lot, that was traced then, leading the police to Michael Speck and Mr. L. By the way, so you probably noticed I'm using Mr. L instead of his real name when I'm using other people's real names. That's because, I covered this story about 3 years ago, and I swiftly had to remove the video because Mr. L's lawyer threatened to sue me if I left it up. So the reason was, Mr. L was charged with the murder, but he appealed and the charge was dismissed, which was something I actually was not aware of when I posted the video, that the charge was dismissed. Oh, no, sorry, he was actually convicted of shooting Nancy Howard. He was convicted of it and sentenced for it, but he appealed and then the conviction was dismissed. So, to be clear, no one knows who actually shot Nancy Howard. Frank's trial took place in August 2014, 2 years after his wife was almost killed, and he was charged with attempted capital murder. Nancy testified, Frank's mistress Suzanne Leontief testified, as did Billy, Stacey, Charlie, Dustin, Stephanie, Jason, all this whole gang, telling the court how they'd only strung John along for years, taking millions of dollars. And Frank's boss, the defense contractor, told the court how Frank had embezzled over $30 million from the company. After all, how was Frank paying for all this shit, if not embezzling, stealing money from his employer, the ice combat business? Frank's defense, though, that went with him. Oh, he was being blackmailed over his affair by what was later called the Hee Haw Gang. That's, that he was a victim here. He was being blackmailed. That Frank had stopped paying them money weeks before the shooting, and so they shot Nancy, tried to kill her, not because he wanted her dead, but for revenge. And that is, to date, what Frank's children believe also. But not what the jury believed. Frank Howard was sentenced to life in prison. However, during her victim impact statement, Nancy Howard, she said she forgave him for what he did, and that she loves him still, though they did divorce. Frank Howard appealed in 2016, and it was denied. Michael Speck, the driver in that car, got 12 years. Mr. L, who was the alleged shooter at the time, he got 60 years, but that would be reversed, and he would be found not guilty, acquitted of shooting Nancy. So, to date, we still do not know who's responsible for shooting Nancy, but we can assume it was one member of the Hee Haw gang. Nancy would say it was God that had saved her after she was shot in the head, managed to get her up off the bloody garage floor and call 911, that she was saved, quote, by her heavenly father. I think, Nancy, you're selling yourself a little short there. But one person who didn't sell themselves short was John. He thought he was some kind of mastermind, when in fact he was a fucking idiot who got taken for millions of dollars. That were millions of dollars that were not his, that he stole from his boss by a gang of goons in the middle of nowhere. John Frank was a gobshite. And that is that story. By the way, a special thank you to Michael J. Mooney, who wrote an excellent account of this case in How Not to Get Away with Murder in D Magazine. And now, let's get on to our next all story. This is a very weird and twisting story. It's about a local radio host named April Kaufman. April was married to Dr. James Kaufman, a prominent New Jersey endocrinologist. Endocrinologist? Whoa, look at you and your big words. I actually have no idea what that means, so bear with me, I'm Googling it. Oh goddamn, endocrinologists are medical doctors who specialize in diagnosing and treating health conditions related to problems with the body's hormones. Folks, all I have to say to that is, wow. And this Dr. James, he hired, much like Frank did, some lads to do a job for him. Let's see where it went. Let's give it a go. April Kaufman was born and raised in the state of New Jersey, a lifelong shore resident. She had a strong love of motorcycles, of Corvettes, and an even bigger passion advocating for US military veterans. She would go on to, she'd be involved in countless programs helping soldiers. Now, April, she was a bit of an entrepreneur, you know yourself, she worked on her own ventures for years. She was the owner of a salon. She owned a catering company. And April, she would go on to be a popular talk show radio host on WIBG-FN, weekdays between 2 and 4. So that's like prime radio host slotting right there. Like, she must have been real good.
It was such a big issue that affected our veterans and our state, our country. So I will thank my husband for a lot of the things that I've learned over the years.
She had a strong personality, gregarious. She was well liked by her audience, where she would kind of just talk about anything and everything. She lived in Linwood, New Jersey, with her husband since 2003. That was Dr. James Kaufman, a fairly prominent guy in his own right. She had one daughter, Kim, who was from a previous marriage, and April had 2 grandsons. Now, Dr. James, let's talk a little bit about him for a second. He was a tough guy. A former Green Beret, medals galore, Purple Heart, sharpshooting medals, a Viet-fucking-Nam vet. He had been in the shit, ambushed by the Vietnamese. He had been stabbed. He had clawed his way out of danger. Platoon? We've all seen the movie Platoon. Dr. James lived it. 2 tours in Vietnam. So, as you can imagine, this was a good fit for April, who was out there, always demanding quality healthcare for those who served. And so April and James, they were 2 large figures in the community. Him, working in his medical practice, leaving out the door every morning very early before April herself would be out the door working on her various ventures and, of course, as a radio host. So Thursday, May 10th, 2012, that was no different. However, at 8:30 a.m., Dr. James called his wife from his practice in Egg Harbor Township, as he usually did in the mornings. He would have been there for a couple of hours. He would always call April just as she was getting up. This time, however, he got no answer from April. After trying to call her a few more times, He called the handyman who worked for him, to go in and check on her. Then, well, this happened.
Yes, I have my bosses down. She's got a cut on her arm.
47-year-old April was found dead on the floor of her bedroom, face down, having been shot multiple times in their home. The medical examiner would speculate she had been shot in her bed and struggled before collapsing on the floor. This soon became, as you can imagine, right, folks, like a media frenzy. A very popular local radio host gunned down in her own home, in her own bed. The investigation began, and the funeral was held. And so whispering, began about what could have happened to this public figure who was well liked by everyone. Was it, an affair? Now, it did appear there was that kind of stuff going on both April's side and Dr. James's side. Look, it can be a shitstorm, as we've seen many times. No, but did April have a fear that something like this could happen? Well, her last radio appearance seemed to suggest it to a certain point.
My legacy of leaving, a really beautiful daughter and 2 grandchildren on this planet, I really hope to God that people, hey, I could get a flyover at my funeral now, but could really say that here was an American citizen who really stood up and dug her heels in and yelled fire, and I expected it to be put out.
Seemed like April was not entirely comfortable with, life. Now, as I've said, the rumor mill was going like crazy, but to April's daughter, Kim Pack, she was pointing the finger from Jump Street, pointing it right at her stepfather, Dr. James Kaufman. Now, they never really got along, Kim and Dr. James. I mean, on Kim's wedding day, the pictures they weren't terribly close. There was a cold relationship between the two of them. You know what I mean? I mean, their relationship was dripping with as much love as this sentence is sarcasm. It seems, this big shot, Dr. James, he was very controlling of April. And in fact, 2 months before April's death, she confided in her daughter Kim that, well, stick a fork in it, this marriage is done. And a few days after the murder, James, he hired a big shot defense attorney, paying top dollar, when he was not named a suspect, which is, in itself, suspect. Now, at the time of April's death, right, he had a great alibi. He was caught on footage buying a little snacky, at the exact moment his wife was shot, Dr. James Kaufman was in the local Wawa, right? Kim was on the case as the months went by, trying to get something to happen in the investigation. James, he had stopped talking to her a long time ago, and the county prosecutor was, repeating the line. It's an active investigation, blah, blah, blah. But for such a high-profile case, it seemed the investigators were kind of dragging their feet, while the public were more keen. It seemed the public were more, keen on getting answers than the people who were supposed to. And it was never explained why the case, such a major newsworthy one, was kind of sort of kicked to the curb. While there was a candlelit vigil on the 1-year anniversary, James, he was off auctioning April's stuff. A few months later, he remarried, this time to his high school sweetheart. I mean, okay, we're talking like 40 years after high school, but I guess it's never too late, so there you go. Now, what really lit the powder keg in the aftermath of April Kaufman's death was when James went after her life insurance policy. Classic. See, this was not the first time. He had tried to get it 3 months after the murder. The insurance crowd were, kind of hesitant because, the murder was unsolved. So then, in June 2013, he filed suit. Now he was demanding the money. So with James still not a suspect, and with Kim believing him to be that guy, she herself, Kim, filed a wrongful death suit against James. Now this would prevent him from getting the $600,000 life insurance policy. See, of course, as you're probably aware, there's the old Slayer statute. No money until the insurance company could be assured that James wasn't the killer.
And she had a pallor, which I've known after 30 years is obviously someone has passed away. And I ran downstairs and went out on the lawn and was hysterical and started vomiting.
Okay, do you have tissues, by the way?
I got them.
Do you need to break?
James, he would give a deposition in the wrongful death suit, categorically denying that he had played any part in April's death. And during that 4-hour deposition, though, something kind of sort of came out about dear old Dr. James. He never served in the military. He was full of shite.
Have you ever served in any branch of the military?
No.
Did you ever tell Kim Pack you were in the military?
Yes.
Okay. Did she ever do a project for college, and part of the project was you being in the military?
Yes.
And what you went through?
Yes.
And that you carried bodies?
Yes.
And the torture that you had gone through?
Yes.
Did you ever tell anyone that you were a Green Beret?
Yes.
Stolen valor, I believe it's called. A big no fucking no. He also started to gave his theories on what really happened to April and who was responsible, pretty much out of left field. The Pagans, he said.
What motorcycle gang?
Yeah, Pagans.
Now, the Pagans were a motorcycle club, founded in 1959, and are seen as kind of an outlaw motorcycle gang, thanks to Sons of Anarchy, that kind of stuff. It's like they're a rival, I believe they're a rival to the Hells Angels. They have allegedly, been involved in various criminal enterprises on the East Coast. Pretty hardcore, don't mess around with them. 1%ers is what they're called. But this time, that, as they say, was that. No decision would be made on the civil suit at the time. Wouldn't be for 5 years. In 2017, a new county prosecutor, Damon Tyner, he would take office. He asked his staff to compile a list of unsolved homicide cases going back 40 years in Atlantic County. He wanted the ones that were solvable. April Kaufman's was on that list pretty high up. So the police, they would open up the case again, 5 years after the fact. And, in those 5 years, certain breaks had been made. James's deposition included. And so there was a renewed investigation to get to the bottom of what happened. By the way, so don't heap too much praise, though, on the good old Damon Tyner, the county prosecutor. He himself would have to leave his office early, resigning from his position as county prosecutor after facing multiple lawsuits and ethics complaints. Former employees of the county prosecutor's office, they would sue him, alleging he discriminated against them on the basis of their gender. He created a toxic work environment for women. There were allegations of harassment, allegations he engaged in mortgage fraud and other misconduct. So, maybe not the best boyo over here. So they decided that James, he was worth another look. And when a tip came in from the FBI about James, but on a completely different matter, well, maybe he was, worth a little more looking into than he had been previously. See, investigators, the FBI, they got a tip that maybe he was involved in some kind of scheme out of his office, selling narcotics out of his office. And so the police went over to investigate the place, go through his paperwork, make sure everything was hunky-dory, and see if he was hiding anything. But when the police showed up, Dr. James Kaufman, he grabbed a gun, and there was a standoff outside his office.
Here he comes.
He just went the other way. He just went down the side hallway. He might have been on the phone, I think.
Yeah, it looked like he was on the phone and wandered down.
He went down the side hallway.
How you doing? Detective Scope with the prosecutor's office under the last week. You stay right here, Tommy. Just keep your hands off out there.
No. I'm killing myself.
Don't! Coming back. We have one at gunpoint, Dr. James Kaufman.
Put the gun down.
5'11". I have one at gunpoint, Dr. James Kaufman. He has a weapon. Drop the gun! Drop the gun! Hey! Drop the gun! Drop the gun! Sir! Drop the gun!
They would eventually make their way inside, and James Kaufman was arrested on weapons charges. And this gave prosecutors time to really get into what happened to April. And a cooperating witness informed the police that James, he'd been inquiring. How do I, if I wanted to, the witness came forward and said James had been asking around, how would I get rid of somebody in like a permanent kind of way? This cooperating witness was a former member of the Pagans, the very people James had years previously tried to throw in the fire. It turned out that Dr. James did have a secret life, where, by night, he would write fraudulent opioid prescriptions for the Pagan biker gang. James had a little drug ring going on. The bikers, they would pop by his office, pick up prescriptions, and then sell them on the street. April learned of this. She also learned that James was no Green Beret. As you can imagine, April fought so hard for, military veterans. Finding out your husband lied about being one, well, you can imagine how betrayed she must have felt. So she, divorce. She said, I will expose you. I'll expose the little drug ring you have going on if you don't divorce me. And that is what led to her death. This all happened a year before she was killed, in 2011. Over the next 12 months, a hitman would be sought out and found. Now, that wasn't the only little fraud James was involved in when he essentially told the Hippocratic Oath to go fuck itself in return for some sweet, sweet money. He was also linked to an insurance fraud scheme, one involving unnecessary blood tests where he would get a kickback from the lab, another involving compound cream prescriptions for pain management. Like, patients would come into him, he would, you need to have a blood test done. You need this cream. He would get kickbacks from the blood test lab and the cream place while the insurance company were picking up the tab. Dr. James Kaufman paid a biker 10 grand to commit the murder of April Kaufman. And as he left that morning on the 10th of May 2012, he left the doors to his house unlocked, according to the prosecutors. Shortly after he left the convenience store, he apparently handed the hitman a gun and pointed him in the direction of his home. Funnily enough, now the killer, the hitman. Now James, he did not pull the trigger, killing his wife, but James was responsible for a death. Well, if you're counting him being a drug dealer, many deaths. See, the hitman, the person who actually killed April, Francis Mulholland, he died a year and a half after he killed April of an overdose prescribed by one Dr. James Kaufman. It seems this Francis, he never got over what he had done. And so, for 5 years after April's death, the drug ring continued, now that a loose end had been taken out of the picture. In January 2018, James Kaufman was charged with putting a hit on his wife and racketeering, working with the Pagans to set up an illegal drug ring distribution network for OxyContin. He was accused of working with the apparent leader of the Pagans, a fella named one Ferdinand Augello, to do what happened. So James would be arrested, and a number of others indicted in this drug ring. Now, of course, James, he would deny all this. He would say he had been forced to take part in the scheme, and April was killed because he refused to do it anymore. That April was killed out of revenge, much like Frank Howard would argue. Nancy Howard had been shot out of revenge. Now, the majority seemed to find that unbelievable, but he did have his supporters who believed him. Now, as his links with the Pagan Motorcycle Gang were already being exposed, the prosecutors, they began to worry that, in jail, he could be assaulted, or even worse, before he actually went to trial. So, James Kaufman, who would be moved to another facility for his own protection. However, before he could go on trial, in January 2018, 68-year-old James was found dead inside the county jail where he was being held. He'd used the bedsheet on himself. Beside him was a 6-page suicide letter. In it, he denied doing anything to his wife. He said it was April herself who introduced him to the Pagan Motorcycle Gang. Remember, April Kaufman did love bikes and all that stuff. And she was the one responsible for setting up this narcotics ring with the Pagans. But that's not thought to be true. Let me quote from his suicide letter. As God is my witness, and will be, I cannot live like this. I, no matter what anybody says, I did not do anything to my wife, and I am not, and was not in the rackets. Morituri Te Salutamus. That is Latin for "we who are about to die salute you," said by captives and criminals who were to die during the gladiatory fights in ancient Rome. It's in the movie Gladiator. Quote, "Sometime in 2011, April came to me and said, would I like to go to a motorcycle rally at Smithville to meet some of her friends? When we got there, they were sitting on an outside patio next to the bar. I was slightly shocked, to say the least, that they had the colors of the pagans. I was very nervous. One of the leaders said for me to see his motorcycle. When we got there, he said April said I would help them out. And after that, he explains how he was strong-armed into the plot. I want to apologize to any person I have hurt, insulted, or was rude to in my 68 plus years. I made peace with God and said the Shema. I'm ready to go. Goodbye. P.S. Sorry about my handwriting, and thanks to my friends who stood by me. They knew I didn't kill April." Ferdinand Augello was ultimately convicted in the murder of April Kaufman, but denies he had anything to do with it. In 2018, he was sentenced to life in prison. Fun story. In October of 2020, by the way, Freddie actually emailed me. Yeah, me, Mike, when I covered this previously in a video years ago. Here's the email. "Hi Mike, this is Freddie. My contact person, Leslie, whom is typing this for me, saw your video about my case. If you get a chance to go to my site on Facebook, Freddie Augello, and see what I and others have to say. I think you will be interested in what I have to say. I have been wrongfully convicted and many guilty people have been let go by prosecutor Damon Tyner. I actually made a living making signs and lettering for trucks for 30 years. Check out the free Freddie site. You can also find his music on Apple Music under Willie Rocket Grey Gypsy. And you can see what people don't know about because the prosecutor made sure anything positive about me wasn't brought up during my trial. They tried to make me look like a bum who lived off drug sales, which I am not. The truth matters. Thank you very much, Freddie." It was an interesting email. I didn't actually respond to it. I wasn't quite sure how to be honest. But you can go on his Facebook and it's still quite active to this day. And he strenuously denies being involved in anything like what he has been accused of and convicted of. But so ends this whole story. April died, James died, the hitman died, and one of the leaders, the alleged leader, I guess you could say, well, convicted, but he denies it. Freddie Augello is in prison and will be unless something miraculous happens for him. This is a story about how you can, it's a story about greed, how you can have it all and still not enough, which always inevitably leads to tragedy all around. Like a ring. A narcotics ring. See? Hey, see? Or the hee-haw gang ring. Man, these stories are so similar. It's insane. But I hope you enjoyed them both. Thank you so much for listening to this whole podcast, folks. I really appreciate you taking the time, being here, listening to me yammer on about these absolutely wild true crime cases. Please, the next podcast episode will be out in a couple of days, every Monday and every Friday, with a video every Tuesday. So check it out, please. And if I could ask you for anything, if you wouldn't mind leaving some reviews, follows, 5-star reviews would be incredibly helpful. Thanks everybody. And yeah, as always, please take care of each other, take care of yourselves, because I love you. Mike out.